It was an unusually chilly morning in the small town of Meadowbrook, nestled deep in the heart of Oregon. The river that carved its path through the town, usually serene and inviting, seemed more formidable under the cold, gray sky. The early frost clung to the banks, glistening under the thin rays of a pale sun. As people in the town hurried through their morning routines, wrapped in scarves and jackets, life unfolded as it always did, ordinary, routine, unremarkable. But for a creature without a home, each day was a battle for survival. Rusty, a scruffy golden retriever mix with matted fur and eyes that spoke of quiet suffering, roamed the streets of Meadowbrook. His days were spent scavenging scraps, avoiding human indifference, and finding shelter wherever he could. Despite his rough exterior, there was something undeniably noble about him, a glimmer of loyalty in his gaze that hinted at a past life, one that was better, warmer, and full of love. Rusty had once belonged to a family, but fate had cast him aside, leaving him to fend for himself. On that morning, Rusty awoke in the abandoned shed he called home, shivering as he tried to shake off the cold. The scent of wet earth and dry leaves filled the air as he ventured out, hunger gnawing at his empty stomach. He followed the familiar path down the riverbank, where occasionally a kind soul would leave scraps of food. As he neared the river, the sound of rushing water and chirping birds filled the crisp morning silence. But today, another sound, a soft, almost imperceptible cry, cut through the natural symphony. Rusty's ears perked up. His instincts sharpened. It was the sound of distress, faint and fragile, almost like the mewl of a kitten. Yet, as he followed the sound, weaving through the reeds and overgrown grass, he realized it was something else entirely. There, nestled between the roots of an ancient willow tree, wrapped in a thin, damp blanket, was a baby, a tiny human, no more than a few months old, with a face red from the cold and crying. For a moment, Rusty froze, his heart pounding against his ribcage. Memories of warm hands, laughter, and a child's embrace flooded his mind. He shook them away, focusing on the fragile life before him. The baby's cries weakened, and a shiver ran through its small body. The urgency of the moment gripped Rusty. He knew that if he did not act, the baby would not survive much longer in the biting morning air. He approached slowly, sniffing the bundle as the baby's cries faded into exhausted whimpers. Something deep within Rusty stirred, a fierce protectiveness, a determination born of loss and longing. Without another thought, he gently gripped the blanket between his teeth, careful not to harm the child, and began the journey that would define both of their lives. The path to the nearest hospital was more than a mile away, winding through uneven streets and dense neighborhoods. Rusty's paws, cracked and sore, padded quickly over gravel and stone, his breath visible in puffs of steam. Passers-by cast curious glances at the strange sight, a stray dog with a bundle, moving with the urgency of a guardian angel. Yet none stopped to intervene, too caught up in their own routines to see the miracle unfolding before them. Rusty's determination was unyielding. Every step felt like a battle against the weight of exhaustion, but the baby's soft breaths urged him onward. Memories of warm fires and a home filled with laughter fueled his resolve. This child would not be abandoned as he had been. Not today, not ever. Rusty pressed on, the weight of his fragile cargo growing heavier as the minutes ticked by. The town of Meadowbrook began to wake fully, with the faint sound of church bells echoing in the distance and the streets slowly filling with the morning hustle. Rusty knew he was racing against time, and each bark of a stray dog or honk of a distant car only heightened his anxiety. The baby's breathing had grown shallow, and its tiny fingers twitched inside the thin blanket. The path ahead wound through the park, a shortcut that would save Rusty precious minutes but was fraught with its own challenges. The frost-covered grass crunched beneath his paws as he pushed forward. Memories of playing fetch in that same park with a little girl who called him her best friend came rushing back, threatening to pull him into the comfort of the past. But now was not the time to remember. Now was the time to act. A sharp bark nearby snapped him out of his reverie. A pack of larger stray dogs emerged from behind a cluster of bushes, their eyes narrowing at the newcomer. Rusty bristled but did not slow down. His mission was clear, and no obstacle, no matter how intimidating, would keep him from reaching the hospital. The leader of the pack, a muscular, dark-coated mutt with a scar running down his left eye, growled low. It was a warning, a claim of territory. Rusty knew these dogs, had fought for scraps with them and earned their contempt when he refused to join their pack. But this time, Rusty was not here for scraps. He held his head high and kept moving, every muscle in his body tensed as he passed them. The leader lunged, teeth flashing. Rusty dodged, feeling the whoosh of air as sharp canines narrowly missed his ear. A chorus of growls erupted, but the baby's whimper, small and desperate, silenced them all. The dogs hesitated, their eyes darting to the bundle. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of the baby's labored breaths and the tense stillness of a moment suspended in time. Rusty seized the pause, surging forward with renewed energy. Behind him, the pack seemed momentarily stunned, unsure of what to make of the strange scene. Their territory challenge forgotten, they watched as the determined dog disappeared down the frosty path, a lifeline in his jaws. The road turned to cracked pavement, lined with shops just beginning to open their doors. Mrs. Callahan, an elderly florist with silver hair tied in a bun, stood at her storefront arranging bouquets. She caught sight of Rusty and gasped, dropping her basket. Her heart, already tender from years of solitude after her husband's passing, clenched at the sight of the dog and the tiny, frail bundle he carried. She shouted for help, her voice wavering but urgent. "Someone, please! That dog, he's got a baby!" A few townspeople gathered, curiosity turning to shock as they recognized the situation. Mr. Patel, the baker known for his stern demeanor, stepped forward with cautious movements, but Rusty backed away, a low growl in his throat. His eyes locked onto the man's with a mix of warning and pleading. This was not the moment for trust, it was a moment for action. Understanding dawned in Mr. Patel's eyes, and he stepped back, raising his hands in surrender. Rusty's determination burned brighter as he spotted the hospital sign at the end of the street. The building loomed tall, its windows gleaming under the early morning light like beacons of hope. The weight in Rusty's mouth shifted as the baby's head lolled slightly, the last of its cries replaced by a troubling silence. Panic surged in Rusty's chest, a wild, uncontrollable fear that gripped him harder than any battle for survival ever had. As he reached the hospital's entrance, the automatic doors whooshed open, the warm air inside hitting him like a wave. Nurses and doctors in white and blue uniforms paused, eyes wide at the sight of the dog carrying the limp, bundled infant. The silence was electric, the disbelief palpable. Then, like a sudden storm, a flurry of movement erupted. A nurse with a kind face and practiced hands stepped forward, gently taking the baby from Rusty's jaws. "Code Blue!" someone shouted as the medical team sprang into action, rushing the baby onto a stretcher and down the hall. Rusty, panting and trembling, stood frozen at the entrance. His body ached, each muscle screaming from exhaustion, but he refused to move. He watched as the child was whisked away, hope and fear mingling in the air like the scent of antiseptic and sterile walls. The hallway was filled with the sharp beeps of monitors and hurried footsteps. But amidst the chaos, one voice, clear and sure, rose above the rest. "She's breathing. We've got her stabilized." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Rusty's ears perked, and his tired eyes closed for a brief moment. Relief washed over him, powerful and overwhelming. But this was only the beginning. Somewhere deep inside, he knew that this moment would change everything, for both of them. Rusty stood at the entrance of the hospital, the chill of the morning air now replaced by the sterile warmth of the lobby. His legs felt like they were made of lead, and his vision blurred at the edges from exhaustion. But he didn't move. His gaze remained fixed on the hallway where the medical team had disappeared with the infant. Whispers and curious glances passed among the hospital staff and visitors who had witnessed the surreal scene. A stray dog, seemingly sent from nowhere, saving a baby. An older doctor, Dr. Mitchell, with kind eyes and a white coat that had seen decades of service, approached Rusty cautiously. He knelt down, taking in the dog's ragged fur, the scars that mapped his body, and the silent plea in his amber eyes. Dr. Mitchell's heart tightened at the sight. He reached out a hand, and Rusty, sensing no danger, leaned forward, allowing the touch. It had been so long since he'd felt a gentle hand. "Good boy," Dr. Mitchell whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done something incredible today." Rusty's ears flicked back, his body finally relaxing under the weight of the doctor's praise. For a moment, there was calm, the kind of peace that felt foreign but welcome. Yet, the stillness didn't last long. The commotion in the hallway grew louder as the baby's cries filled the air again, stronger this time, a sign of life returning. The sound made Rusty's tail twitch with an instinctive wag, hope rekindling in his tired body. A nurse approached Dr. Mitchell with updates. "The baby girl is stable now, sir. Hypothermia and dehydration, but she's responding well to treatment. It's a miracle she made it here in time." The word miracle hung in the air, resonating through the hearts of everyone present. Eyes turned back to Rusty, who now sat with a quiet dignity, head held high despite his exhaustion. The realization swept through the room. This stray, often overlooked and forgotten, had defied the odds and brought life to a child on the brink of death. As the news of Rusty's heroic deed spread, local reporters arrived, eager for a story that embodied hope and resilience. Cameras clicked and lights flashed as Rusty blinked, momentarily startled by the sudden attention. The headlines practically wrote themselves. "Stray dog saves baby's life in a heroic act of love." But amidst the flurry of activity, one voice cut through, soft and hesitant. "Is he a hero dog?" The voice belonged to a young boy named Tommy, who stood beside his mother, eyes wide with wonder. Tommy had always been afraid of dogs, ever since a childhood incident left him with a scar and lingering fear. But today, he felt something different, a spark of admiration that battled with his fear. Tommy's mother, a warm woman with soft curls and kind eyes, nodded, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Yes, Tommy. He's more than a hero." The boy took a step closer, and Rusty turned to look at him, tilting his head as if sensing the boy's internal struggle. Rusty's tail swished softly across the tiled floor, inviting trust without force. Tentatively, Tommy reached out, his small hand brushing against Rusty's fur. It was rough and patchy but warm. The touch broke through Tommy's fear, replacing it with awe. Dr. Mitchell watched the exchange, his mind racing with possibilities. This dog, once a stray with no name and no place, had done what many wouldn't dare. He saved a life and, in doing so, changed his own. The doctor made a decision then and there. He turned to the hospital's public relations officer, who was already drafting statements and organizing press coverage. "I don't want this to be just a story that fades with tomorrow's paper. This dog deserves a home and a future. Let's find out who he is, where he came from, and what we can do for him." Meanwhile, Rusty, now surrounded by a circle of admiring eyes, looked up at Dr. Mitchell, his exhaustion giving way to a cautious hope. He couldn't understand the words being exchanged, but he felt the shift in the air, the change that signified a new chapter. The local news anchor approached with a microphone, crouching to Rusty's level. "Who would have thought that a forgotten dog would be the town's guardian angel?" she said, her voice cracking slightly as she spoke. But as the questions poured in and the cameras continued to snap, a young nurse came running down the hallway, her voice cutting through the din. "Dr. Mitchell, the baby's mother has been found." A stunned silence fell over the crowd. A woman, disheveled and frantic, was escorted through the hallway. Her eyes darted around, desperate and wide, until they settled on the nurse's arms cradling her child. Tears streamed down her face as she collapsed into grateful sobs. Rusty's ears pricked up at the sound of her voice, recognizing the same urgency and fear he had felt earlier. The mother fell to her knees beside the nurse, reaching out to touch her baby's cheek. The crowd watched, moved by the raw reunion. The miracle they had witnessed was now complete, a mother reunited with her child, thanks to the courage of a dog who had once been lost himself. Dr. Mitchell cleared his throat, his voice solemn yet hopeful. Today, we witnessed something extraordinary, a reminder that love and loyalty can come from the most unexpected places. And in that moment, Rusty, once just another stray on the streets, became Meadowbrook's symbol of hope. The quiet hum of the hospital filled the space as the intensity of the moment subsided. Rusty lay curled in a corner of the lobby, his body finally surrendering to the exhaustion that had gripped him. The sounds of the mother cooing to her child and the soft murmur of voices were a comforting background. He closed his eyes, not in sleep, but in a state of peace that he hadn't felt in years. Dr. Mitchell and the nurses glanced over at him periodically, their expressions a blend of amazement and compassion. Whispers among the hospital staff and visitors grew louder, detailing Rusty's journey through the streets, the baby's miraculous survival, and the stray dog that had done what few could imagine. The story had already begun to ripple beyond Meadowbrook, touching hearts far and wide. A local animal rescue volunteer, Caroline, entered the scene, alerted by the news and the chatter among the hospital staff. She was a young woman with a kind face and eyes that lit up with determination. Caroline had spent years dedicating her life to rescuing abandoned and injured animals, but even she had never encountered a story quite like this. She approached Dr. Mitchell, her gaze shifting to the exhausted hero. "He's incredible," she said softly, squatting down to Rusty's level. Rusty lifted his head, meeting her gaze with tired but trusting eyes. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. Caroline reached out a hand, and when Rusty's tail thumped weakly against the floor, she knew that he was ready for what came next. Dr. Mitchell stepped forward, his expression warm. "Caroline, I think he needs a bit more than just admiration. He needs a home. You think you can help with that?" Caroline's smile widened as she nodded. "I'd be honored. But first, let's make sure he's taken care of." She signaled to an attendant who had brought a blanket and some water. Rusty drank eagerly, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat. Over the next few days, Rusty became the town's sensation. News vans parked outside the hospital, and articles were written celebrating his bravery. Donations poured in from locals who wanted to ensure that Rusty would never have to suffer the hardships of the streets again. Children drew pictures of the hero dog and taped them to the hospital's walls. One drawing, in particular, caught Rusty's attention, a crayon depiction of a dog with a baby cradled in its mouth, signed simply, "Thank you, Rusty." The baby girl, who had been named Hope by the hospital staff until her mother confirmed her name, began to recover rapidly. Her mother, Julia, visited Rusty daily, sitting by his side with gratitude so deep it was beyond words. One afternoon, as Rusty lay in Caroline's temporary shelter for rescued animals, Julia approached with Hope in her arms. The baby's eyes, now bright and curious, looked at Rusty as if recognizing the silent guardian who had saved her life. Julia knelt beside Rusty, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. Because of you, I have my daughter back." She reached out to stroke Rusty's fur, her touch filled with a gentle reverence. Hope gurgled happily, a tiny hand reaching out and brushing Rusty's nose. The dog's tail wagged weakly, his eyes soft with a kind of happiness that came from knowing he had done something profoundly right. Caroline watched the scene, her heart swelling. She knew she couldn't keep Rusty herself. There were too many animals that needed her attention, but she was determined to find him the perfect home. It wasn't long before offers came flooding in. Families from all over Meadowbrook and beyond wanted to adopt the town's newest hero. But it was Tommy's letter that caught Caroline's attention. Written in shaky handwriting, it read, "Dear Caroline, I'm the boy who saw Rusty at the hospital. I was scared of dogs, but not anymore. My mom says I can help Rusty feel loved and not alone, like he did for the baby. I hope he can come live with us. Love, Tommy." Caroline felt a lump form in her throat as she read the letter. She called Tommy's mother, who explained how the boy's fear of dogs had been replaced by admiration and love after witnessing Rusty's heroic act. The family was kind and patient, with a large yard and, most importantly, a lot of love to give. The next week, Rusty was brought to his new home. The house stood on the edge of town, surrounded by sprawling fields where he could run and play. Tommy stood at the gate, bouncing on his toes with anticipation. As Caroline led Rusty forward, the dog's ears perked up, sensing the excitement and warmth radiating from the boy. Tommy's eyes shone with emotion, no fear, only joy. "Hi, Rusty," he whispered, extending a hand. Rusty stepped closer, sniffing the outstretched fingers before nudging them with his nose. The boy laughed, a sound so pure it seemed to echo in the crisp afternoon air. It was the beginning of something beautiful, a friendship born of courage, love, and the miracle that only a true hero could bring. Caroline watched as Rusty settled into the grass, rolling onto his back as Tommy scratched his belly, their laughter blending into the sound of the wind rustling the trees. This was home, finally, after years of searching and surviving. Rusty's journey had led him not just to rescue but to be rescued in return. Rusty's life had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. From a stray roaming the streets, forgotten and invisible, to a cherished member of a family, his journey had touched the hearts of many. In the weeks that followed, Meadowbrook embraced him as their hero. The local park, once just a path of survival for him, was renamed Hope's Haven in honor of the baby he had saved and the dog who had found her. Tommy and Rusty became inseparable. Every morning, they would race through the fields, laughter mingling with the barks of joy as Rusty chased after balls Tommy threw. The boy's fear of dogs was now a distant memory, replaced by the unbreakable bond he shared with his new best friend. The sight of them running together became a symbol in Meadowbrook, proof that even the most unexpected heroes could heal and be healed in return. Julia often visited, sometimes bringing Hope along to sit and watch as Rusty and Tommy played. She would smile, eyes wet with gratitude, knowing that the moment Rusty found her daughter by the river was more than chance, it was fate. It reminded everyone that acts of bravery, no matter where they come from, carry the power to change lives. Dr. Mitchell and Caroline became advocates for stray animals, using Rusty's story as a beacon for their campaign to raise awareness and support for other dogs like him. Donations from across the state flowed in, enough to establish a new shelter that would help countless others find hope, love, and a second chance. And Rusty, he found his place, not just in a home but in the hearts of everyone who knew his story. The once forgotten dog became a legend, proving that even the smallest act of courage can create ripples that change the world. For Tommy, for Hope, and for the town of Meadowbrook, Rusty was more than just a hero. He was a reminder that love and loyalty often come from the most unexpected places. In that town, where the river now sparkled under the sun's gentle rays, Rusty's story lived on, a tale passed down with reverence, a story of a dog who dared to save a life and, in doing so, found his own. It's an honor to be able to create content for you. If you want to support the channel even more, you can follow the instructions that I will leave on the pinned comment. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Love you all.